unless you have a blank. Yeah, what'd you say?
That was 2020.
You know,
It is flannel, but I have the summer blue. Yeah.
like you have a lot of ways to travel Alaska, but nobody
Agreed.
walks into that area.
That's the tradition. It starts raining and then clears up, and it's beautiful. The monsoons. Good morning. All right. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. It's the August 18th, 2022 meeting of the Assembly Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee, meeting of the whole. I call this meeting to order. Let's go around the room. Members, please. Well, I guess the clerk, why don't you go ahead and do the roll?
Miss Allard,
Here.
Mr. Constant,
Here.
Mr. Cross,
Here.
Mr. Dunbar,
Here.
Miss LaFrance, Mr. Presverdia, Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson,
Present.
Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Mr. Solt,
Here.
Mr. Voland,
Here.
Miss Zalatel. Do you have a quorum?
I hit it. Next, we have the agenda under new business. We have, I think we have to change this agenda slightly because everything is either new business or other standing items. We need an unfinished business section, but we'll talk about that later. On the agenda today is a discussion about the proposed plan of finance, where it is in the process. Going to give us a snapshot. It's not coming before us yet, but it is. I'm trying to keep us all in the loop of that conversation. Then we're going to have a briefing on the Eklutna water flow project from members outside of the federal working group that includes the utilities. This is instead the native village of Eklutna Corporation, and the various conservation entities. Then on the agenda, we have, as usual, standing the stormwater utility update, which is at this time, there is no update, and then legislative priorities, budget, and then audience participation. Is there anything we need to add from members? Hearing no additions, we will move right on into the briefing on the Port of Alaska proposed plan of finance and new tariff. Mr. Rebuffo, or Steve's not here. Jim? Come on up, Jim. We have, for this presentation, Jim Jagger and Ross Risvold. You want to lead us off?
I'm not sure.
Hit the button to make
Thank you, Chair.
There you go. Jim first, then Ross. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, this is Jim Jagger from Port of Alaska, and I'm acting while Steve is on vacation. So basically what's going on with the Port plan of finance for the Port Modernization Program is we have been working with the port users, have drafted an initial plan of finance, have done an initial presentation at a Port Commission meeting. They have asked questions about it. We've done one round of, actually we've had two Port Commission meetings about this plan of finance. We've done, got the initial questions, went out, did the initial tweaks, did a formal presentation of the plan 2 weeks ago, and their next meeting on September 28th, the expectation is they will do a final review of the plan, draft or accept it, and then pass it on to the administration and the assembly for final approval. That's the expectation. Ross has the details of it. I'm not sure if you want the full detailed plan, or are you better off with an overview?
You have 22 minutes, plus including questions.
So Ross?
Thank you, Jim, and Chair Constant, and good morning, everybody in attendance. Of course, I'm Ross Risvold. I'm the Public Finance and Investment Division Manager, and I'm participating by phone today. Thank you very much. I do have two PowerPoint presentations. I can go through them both real quickly. It probably wouldn't hurt if we did them both. The first one is the plan of finance. The second one is the repayment of port debt for the PAMP, also known as the surcharge concept. Mr. Constant, am I coming through A-okay?
Yeah, we hear you. No problem. Thanks.
Okay, so if we can go to the plan of finance, it's a 15-page document. And the first page has it dated June 7, 2022. This is the document that we used to procure and solicit for grants from the state of Alaska during the recent legislative session. And page 2 is the presentation participants that were used at that time. I'm using this document because it is what we basically used for the legislature. And it's important for you to see what we gave to them. And there's a couple of minor changes, but we'll go through that in the second presentation. So if we can move to page 3, this is the basic table of contents of what we're going to go through here today. And I'll just skip through that and we'll go on to page 4. Page 4 is a summary of the PAMP cost by phase. And as you can see, we've got the phases listed there and the dollar amount by phase. Phase 1 is nearly complete, expected to be completed here probably in August of this year. It was $228 million. We split phase 2 into 2 phases. Phase A, which is the administration building, and the North End stabilization step 1. That's $143 million. Phase 2B is the cargo terminal docks replacement. Cargo docks replacement, cargo terminal replacement, sort of used in the same vein. The reason this is highlighted and in a blue circle or rectangle is because that was what we were focusing on during the recent legislative session to request money for the PAMP. And the money that we did receive is for the PAMP, not necessarily any particular phase of the PAMP. And then, of course, we have phase 3, which is the petroleum terminal number 2, which is expected to be needed once we've completed the cargo docks. Phase 4 is the second half of the North End stabilization. And phase 5 is the Terminal 3 demolition. All in all, based on prices as of March of this year by our program manager, Jacobs, led by David Ames, the total cost is $1.8 billion. I'll go to page 5. These are the possible sources of funds that we have for the $1.8 billion. Sort of in order here of what we have. We've got municipality funds on hand dedicated to that, including authorization for bonds. The state of Alaska contributions, federal earmarks led by Alaska's congressional delegation. We have an earmark request in there that the congressional delegation is shepherding for us, and we're grateful for that. We also have the opportunity for federal competitive IIJA grants, the recently passed legislation, and their credit programs. Some of that IIJA grants was money for existing programs and a couple of new programs. So there's a port infrastructure development grants. You've probably heard of that. It's PIDP. We also have RAISE grants, which was formerly Tiger and then formerly Build, and now it's called RAISE. And the IIJA legislation provided additional funds for that. There's 2 additional programs. It's an infra program and a mega program, and these are all grant programs. Then at the bottom, we have U.S. Department of Transportation. There's two loan opportunities there that we are pursuing actively as we speak. One is TIFIA and one is RRIF, which is Railroad Infrastructure Financing, I believe is the acronym. And we will apply for one or both, depending on how the letter of interest process goes. Next, we would any shortfall. First, of course, we would use funds on hand, not necessarily port equity, but funds that we've already been allocated to the port from the port. We would use all the free money first, if I may. State of Alaska contributions, federal earmarks, federal grants that do not have to be repaid. Any shortfall of that is going to be made up from port revenue bonds that would be sold as needed and if needed. Now, I have the MARAD federal judgment there at that $367 million that was awarded to the municipality in the federal court of claims. That, of course, is under appeal, and I've listed that last because we don't know when that'll come in or how much it will be, but we're hoping that we'll continue to prevail and we'll have $367 million that will be dedicated to the port. On page 6, this is the status of the possible sources of funds. And I updated this after the legislative session. So the municipality has $222 million of funds available, mainly in bonds that can be issued. The state of Alaska contribution in 2022 legislative session was $100 million. A second $100 million is expected to be appropriated and was passed for appropriation. And that second $100 million is contingent upon receiving federal funds of a like amount, $100 million. Doesn't have to be all in one chunk, and it can be over a period of 5 years, I believe it is. And we do have a reasonable expectation that we will be able to receive federal funds of $100 million over the next 5 years. So I really kind of consider that basically $300 million there. I think the federal earmark has been reduced from 40. Jim, was that reduced to $5 million perhaps? I'm not sure about that dollar amount now.
Yes, right now it's $5 million.
Yep, thanks for that. Thanks for that help there, Jim. I'm going to change that on my slide. So we've also, the port staff has also applied with their contractor for $68 million with PIDP grants. And then there's also the IIJ, Federal Rebuilding America Infrastructure Sustainability Equity. That's the RAISE grants. Those will be applied for when we have notices of funding opportunities, which is abbreviated NOFO. And again, we expect to, between the infra and mega and the build, that was what the $68 million comes from. The $68 million is a combination thereof between those grants. We, of course, don't care which grant it comes from, but the federal government may help us realign where it should come from. And then we also have the TIFIA and RRIF low interest rate loans. So those would be ones we would want to take advantage of before we issue port revenue bonds that would be authorized by the Municipal Assembly. And of course, the MARAD judgment is down below. Page 7. And again, when we were in Juneau, the main idea there was the cargo docks replacement. One cargo dock is going to be designed for, one part of the cargo dock or cargo terminal is going to be designed for lift on, lift off. That's going to cost $643 million. Cargo dock 2 is sort of a roll on, roll off cargo facility. The total cost of that cargo dock replacement is $1.1 billion. In order to start on that, we really need $1.1 billion in committed funds before we can start on the project, because it's built as one continuous cargo terminal. Page 8. That's the source of funds for the cargo docks replacement. The $1.1 billion at that time, at this time, we have $222 million in municipal funds. We have $200 million of state of Alaska funds, and then that other 100 million that's contingent upon us getting the 100 million from Alaska of federal funds is in the 681. So at that point, that's sort of what we hope for. Any shortfall from these funding sources would be made up with a request to the municipal assembly for additional revenue bond debt issuing authority. Again, going on to page 9, that's just a further detail of what was on the prior page. We have a short-term borrowing program of $40 million, the $182 million of authorization for bonds that the municipal assembly has authorized us. We haven't issued that. That's where the $222 million comes from. Then there's the $200 million from the state. And then it would be great, but maybe not a reasonable expectation that we'd receive another $681 million from the federal funding, but that's what's on the page at the moment. Turn to page 10. Repayment of borrowed sources of funds. This is where the surcharge concept comes in. In the case where the municipality borrows funds, that we are assuming that the debt service on those funds will be repaid by a per ton surcharge. In the case of oil or petroleum products, it would be based on barrels, and that's changed in the next presentation. This surcharge occurs at a point when the tonnage crosses the docks at the port in either direction. Therefore, everything that crosses the docks is subject to the surcharge, regardless of where the goods and materials are delivered in Alaska. I've been asked many times to comment on what is the economic impact on certain items, like a basket of goods from the store or lumber vehicles. It's very difficult to quantify the financial impact of the surcharge on any particular item, such as a gallon of milk, a gallon of fuel, lumber delivered to various lumber yards across the state, or a pickup truck delivered to Fairbanks or Kenai. The reason is, it is up to the port user that pays the surcharge as to how each port user passes on the surcharge to its customers. For example, the port user is moving freight across the dock, and they might be delivering that to their customers. Their customers might be Fred Meyer, Safeway, car dealerships across the state. So hence, if the surcharge is passed on to the port user's customers, it is then up to the customer that pays that surcharge that's passed on to them as to how each customer passes on the surcharge to the ultimate consumer. You and I, when we go buy a vehicle or go to the grocery store or go to the lumber yard, something like that. Mr. Constant, am I still coming through okay?
You are, time is slipping out.
Okay, sure. So when we get to the 5-minute warning, why don't you give me the 5-minute warning and
Okay.
I'll understand how to.
You are
expedite.
approximately 5 minutes from the 5-minute warning.
Okay, so the next few pages delineate how the surcharge would be impacted were we to borrow certain various portions of funds. So if we had to borrow only $222 million on page 11, the surcharge would increase 140% by $4. You go to page 12, if the municipality had to borrow $803 million, the increase of $14 would be the impact, and it's a 450% increase on the current tariff amount. On page 13, we're moving from the cargo dock replacement portion, which was $1.1 billion, to the entire PAMP. In order to finish the PAMP with just the $200 million from the state of Alaska and only $100 million in grants from the federal government, that's assuming no more grants come in, we would have to borrow $1.3 billion. That would increase the current tariff, $24, which is a 730% increase over the current tariff amount. Page 14 is a summary of the 3 items I just went through. Now, on page 15, we're summarizing that the state of Alaska and federal funding, in addition to port revenue bonds, that will provide the needed funding for the cargo docks replacement of Phase 2B of the PAMP. The Port of Alaska is a tsunami-proof general cargo port, unlike any other port in Alaska. That's the reason we went to the legislature and said, if you're going to devote money to a port, it should be the Port of Alaska. In order to enter into contracts for Phase 2B, we must have designated and committed funding sources of $1.1 billion for the completion of both cargo docks 1 and 2, no later than early 2025. Since that terminal and those docks are being built as one continuous dock or terminal. Dock 1, which is going to be replaced first under our current plan, will provide food security for the residents of the state of Alaska. Now I can go through the second presentation in a couple minutes. Second presentation is called Repayment of Port Debt for the PAMP, which is a surcharge concept. Page 2 of that second document says PAMP cost by phase. You've seen that on the prior presentation. This one happens to have the dates that we estimate that those phases would be completed, which is kind of helpful. The policy considerations is page 3. As I mentioned, all construction costs are provided by Jacobs as of March 2022, and they use what's called midpoint of construction escalation figures. And those figures include inflation. So if inflation were exactly as they predicted in their projections, the port would cost $1.8 billion, assuming there's no variances in the construction materials, not the cost of them, but the various types and amounts of construction materials. So page 4 talks about the rate design for the surcharge concept. There's basically section 1 there is a surcharge concept based upon commodities crossing the dock on a per ton basis. And that would be charged for the users of the terminal, the cement, petroleum, and cargo. The second group here, that's administration building, north end stabilization, demolition of terminal 3. That is construction. That is phases related to the PAMP that need to be done that benefit all users. So all users would pay a surcharge eventually related to that section. And if we go on to page 5, this is where we drill in a little further into the detail. And I'm using actual numbers for tonnage and barrels for cement, cargo, and petro from 2021. And we have allocated a % of value to each terminal. So for example, the cement terminal is 1% of the $1.5 billion that it would cost, because there's a couple other things in there besides the cargo terminal is $1.1 billion. And then we added in the phase 1 and the phase 3 for it, and that equals a total of $1.5 billion. That's noted there in the last note at the bottom. So in order to meet and again, the surcharge is for debt service only. There's three things that the surcharge would be used for. One is debt service on the bonds. The second is any surplus monies after debt service on the bond would be moved to an investment fund, a long-term investment fund that would grow over time and ultimately be used 50 to 75 years down the road to rebuild the port once again. That's one piece that wasn't done, of course, back in the 1950s or 70s when the two major parts of the port were constructed. And for whatever reason, nowadays it's obviously a good idea to have a investment fund to rebuild it in the future, sort of like a sinking fund. The third use of that money would be for, once the PAMP is constructed, were there to be a natural disaster or a seismic event of some sort that compromised or damaged the port, we could then use those funds that are set aside in the investment fund to reconstruct or rehabilitate any damage done through a natural disaster or seismic event. So what we've come up with here in the middle of page 5 is a commodity surcharge per ton or barrel. So we would, to meet debt service requirements, not just debt service, but required revenue, because investors and rating agencies want to see not just that you're covering debt service, but that you have a debt service coverage ratio that's greater than 1-to-1. And in the case of the port, it's 1.35 times debt service. So in order to achieve the required revenue, which is listed there for the $84 million of bonds that are forecast to be outstanding at the beginning of next year, we would need $7.2 million. And that's broken down by the liability share up above, the value share up above the 1%, 72%, and 26. And it breaks down to 87 cents per ton for cement, $3.24 per ton for cargo, and 12 cents per barrel for oil. Now, I take it one step further. We all know that forecasts don't always come true to the exact dollar amount or weight amount. So we've put in a 5% variance factor for tonnage and barrels. And that basically is increasing that prior line of 87 cents, $3.24, and 12 cents. We're increasing it 5%, which is a reasonable, after discussion with the port and the history of their tonnage and barrels, it was a reasonable assumption to make. So we're looking at 91 cents per ton, $3.40 per ton, and 12.85 cents per barrel. If you go to page 6,
Ross, that's the 5-minute warning.
this is what you're likely to see coming from, this is what we hope you'll see coming from the Port Commission. In the next 5 years, we want to reset the tariff beginning January 1st, 2023. And we're going to reset the tariff for 91 cents for cement, $3.40 per ton for cargo, 12.85 cents per barrel. And we're going to set it for 5 years. But at the end of each year, we will be obligated to revisit this, and we are currently obligated to revisit this, and we'll reset it for the next 4 years plus one more. So every year we'll go forward with a 5-year plan built into the tariff. That's rather than just do 1 year at a time. Rating agencies and the analysts and the investors and their analysts, they want to see what the 5-year plan is, and this is how we accommodate that. On page 7, this is the one thing that's hard to do, but we've taken a run at it. And what is the commodity price impact due to this surcharge? Just the surcharge that we're forecasting today. So the impact on a gallon of milk, which weighs 8.6 pounds, based on a surcharge per ton of $3.40, if that went perfectly through to the ultimate consumer, the consumer would pay 1.46 cents more for a gallon of milk. For a loaf of bread that weighs a pound, the consumer would pay 0.17 cents per loaf of bread. For a 40-pound bag of cement, the consumer would pay 1.82 cents per 40-pound bag of cement. For a pickup truck that weighs 5,000 pounds, the impact would be $8.50. Now, for barrels, we have to make a unit of measure calculation. So we take 1/42nd of a barrel, because a barrel is commonly referred to as having 42 gallons of gasoline in it, or fuel. So we convert that measure to one gallon within a barrel, and the barrel surcharge of 0.1285. That would impact a gallon of fuel with an increase of 0.3 cents per gallon. In summary, on page 8, that's the schedule. That's the implementation schedule that Jim referred to earlier. We hope to have this in effect by January 1st, 2023. You will probably see something in the mid-September from the Port Commission, we believe. And on page 9, I can conclude very quickly. As an enterprise fund and non-regulated utility, the Port of Alaska recovers all costs through user fees. Port infrastructure investment costs across the nation and the world are typically recovered using a surcharge method, as we have proposed here. The surcharge concept of assigning a surcharge to a specific commodity such as petro, cement, and cargo coming across the dock is the policy recommendation of the municipality currently in front of the Anchorage Port Commission. This recommendation is based upon uniform pricing, which is a concept of one price for each user of a particular terminal. In our case, we have a cement terminal, petroleum terminal, and a cargo terminal. The surcharge concept is particularly the uniform surcharge for cargo terminal users has been vetted and reviewed by the municipality's bond council, the municipality's municipal advisor, independent advisors to the port, and is consistent with the municipality's prior practice to support usage pricing and operations. The amount of surcharge will be reviewed annually, as I mentioned, and we will reset it for another 5 years going out. So that means the second and third year, those might change as well, depending on debt service requirements. The surcharge concept is fair, transparent, equitable, and legally defensible. And we believe that the Anchorage Port Commission will soon send you something that represents what's in this document. And we urge you to review it very carefully and ask all the questions that we can come up with. And that's my presentation for the day, Chair Constant.
Okay, so I have a few questions. We don't have a lot of time. Members, questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Curious on your rate design surcharge concept, which was page 6. You said that resets annually. So at the end of the year, are you just analyzing how much material each of those, whether it was cement, cargo pushed, and whether or not you were to meet your 5-year payment calculation? And if less cargo goes through, you'd have to increase it the next year. I imagine, or if there's an increase, which means if there's more cement, more cargo, more petro, then the next year maybe you might be able to lower that rate just to stay on par. I mean, kind of give me an idea when you're saying there's a reset, what are you analyzing and how would that impact the next year?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. It's a good one. I got to turn this down a bit. Okay. Yeah, on page 6 there, that's the forecast for 5 years. We put that in place January 1st, 2023. As I mentioned on a prior page, that's based on 2021 actual numbers. So a year from now, in the fall of 2022, we would look at actual numbers for those are actual numbers from, those are 2021 actual numbers. So a year from now, which would be 2023, we will look at actual numbers for 2022 and probably use that as our forecast. The other variable that is important is if there's more debt issued, or if we didn't issue what we forecasted we'd issue, that's a second variable to what happens to those 5-year numbers. Does that help?
Yeah, so it's not analyzed based on the amount of cargo. I guess it's just mattered. It sounds like you're saying it's what other debt or other resources. So the only reason I'm asking is,
sir,
thought.
If I may,
go ahead.
Yeah, my apologies, but if I may, it is based on the next year's actual numbers of cargo and petroleum. Okay, but it's also based on how much debt is outstanding, which produces that required revenue number, which right now is $7.2 million on that other page.
Yeah, what I'm looking at here is,
so those are
those
are the two things that will impact those 5-year numbers.
Okay. I guess my thought on this, and I mean, it's the most logical way to do it. The disadvantage of this system, obviously, is that when you go through periods of, say, recession and there's less growth, then that means there's less cargo, which means you're bringing in less money, which means the next year you have to increase. Yes, sir.
And that's a good point. I'll take one quick reply to that, if I may. We look back 15 years on the cargo and barrels coming across the port. And there was only 2 times when there was really a material spike. One was in 2009, right in the wake of the Great Recession, financial crisis. And the other one was with regard to COVID. So otherwise, the tonnage and the barrels coming across the port are fairly stable year after year after year. But you're right, if there's a dramatic drop, in the cargo, we'd have to we might have to take into consideration whether that spike down is going to continue for the next year or more.
Okay, thank you.
So we are out of time. I have one question, real brief, and then a list of questions for response back later. The commodity surcharge concept, page 5, is that based on the expense projections for, in the other slide deck, the total cost with the muni only borrowing 222 million, or the muni borrowing 800 million, or the muni borrowing 1.3 billion?
Sure. On page 5, if I may, Mr. Constant.
Yep.
Page 5 shows outstanding debt 2020 Series 8, $19 million. We're forecasting that we may issue additional debt of $65 million in 2022.
Yep.
If we did, the total outstanding debt would be $84 million. That's related to the cargo terminal.
Okay, let me hold off. Page 7, not page 5.
And it's
The impacts on costs
On
that you
page-
projected out, are those based on getting to the terminal built with a bunch of federal money or mostly tariff money?
It's built with, well, the numbers on page 7 are delineated from, are derived from what's on page 5.
Right, and so then, but I'm
Okay,
trying to
so
track that
what's on
back.
page 5 shows $84 million of debt outstanding, and the required revenue for that is $7.2 million. We're
Okay,
only looking at what is outstanding right now,
I see.
and we're going to look at it every year. So
practically
this
speaking,
required revenue, which goes into page 7, is based on
Ross,
page 5's required revenue.
it is. Ross, the question I'm having is, essentially, when what I hear is this is based on 7 million or a very small section of the debt, if we're talking about $1.3 billion of debt, then magnify 7 million to 1.3 billion. Is that the cost we're talking about on a price of a gallon of milk? So like 200 times or 300 times? I'm trying to understand what this is communicating relative to the overall project.
Ross, can I take a shot at this, please? This is Jim Jager.
Please, Jim.
We
Yes, sir.
really have 3 sets of variables going on here. We don't have a final plan yet, so we don't have a final design, so that we don't know a final cost estimate. We have a best projection of what our cost estimate is. We don't know exactly how much federal funding we have, but we have a projection of what that's going to be. And then we have a projection of our cargo and the amount of tariff we'll collect. All 3 of those are variables, and they're going to go up and down. We've put out our best projections of what we expect, and that's what these numbers are based on. That's why we have the 5-year review, because as these variables change and get more certainty, we will adjust.
And are these commodity price increases or impacts based on 5 years? a small
They
amount of debt,
they
or
are
the whole
based on our
project?
best projection for all 3 of those variables
For the whole project?
for the whole project.
Okay, we're not talking about in 5 years,
No,
we're coming back and
excuse me.
multiplying this times 10 or 100.
Go ahead, Ross.
No, excuse me, excuse me, Chair and Mr. Jager. This is based on $84 million of debt and the required revenue thereon, which is $7.2 million. If we have to double that next year, if we come back next year and that number's $168 million, then you can double everything.
And then if we project out to 1.3 billion, we just double it several times.
You can take a proportionate share and double it as many times as you want, but we're only going to charge these users for what we need right now.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, and we're really going to run out of time here.
Yeah, I don't understand how you get to, so maybe I'm misunderstanding a little bit here too. On page 11 of one of these, you talk about the increase the tariff to 7.83. That is by increasing the price of a ton by 3.4, right? And so, I guess that would be 4.4.
What page are we on?
Well, I just don't understand how the increase of 3.5. Oh, I'm sorry. I misread it. Okay. That's where the confusion comes in, because it's a 5,000 pound pickup truck. I thought you were using the one ton at 3. Well, you are for 3.4 for a ton. 3.4 per ton. I thought that would raise you closer to the $220 million
Okay,
you
so I'm going
project
to
on
intervene
here.
here and say we need to come back to this conversation and
Yeah.
have a little bit more briefing. I understand there are users here that, have some support for this concept and have some opposition. And I'm glad folks didn't cancel their vacations to come, because it was clear to me that we are going to have to do some more work on this. And Ross, maybe what I will ask is for you, Jim, Meg, Zalatel, and myself to meet so you can walk us through the concept. And we can then decide how to proceed with the committee work. I have questions like, why 10 years between part 2A and 2B? What's the plan for procurement of those federal funds? What's the amount that's available now? Who's writing grants for the port? Lots and lots of questions. And so, but we have another presentation to make today. And so I think we need more time with this. So thank you, everybody. Sorry for the folks who've been waiting.
Happy to participate in anything you suggest, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ross. And yeah, I think it'll be easier to just sit down with paper and a couple of us and sort out what we think is germane, and then we'll bring it forward to the committee to make sure has enough time. Thanks. So next, we're going to move on to the Eklutna Water Restoration Project. And why don't you folks come on up who wish to participate? So we were supposed to have a slide deck. It was just some pretty pictures. Did we not get it printed? Put it on the slide. It's fine. Pretty pictures. So there's not a strong framing of this conversation. This is kind of part 2 of last month's conversation. And I don't know where Austin went. She probably just stepped out of the room for a sec. But Austin and Forrest have been kind of driving on this project. I've been helping them on the sides. And we are here today to hear from our friends at Eklutna both Eklutnas about this project. So, gentlemen, you have the floor. Push the button. Introduce yourself.
Okay, Curtis McQueen.
It's not on.
You got to really hit the button hard and let it go.
No, you got it. Wait until it goes green.
There you are.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Good to see some friends here. Curtis McQueen. Been involved in this project for almost 15 years as the CEO of Eklutna Inc. It was our corporation working very close with the tribe that took the lower dam down to be able to start moving forward on this project. I continue to work both with the Conservation Fund and the Native Village of Eklutna on this project.
And Aaron Leggett, the president of the Native Village of Eklutna and former Eklutna Inc. board member, and work closely with Curtis on this project and the assembly.
So, good morning. The picture you're seeing here was a wonderful celebration almost a year ago, this in September, I believe, where the river, working with the utilities, was, as we call the spigot, was turned back on. And for approximately 3 weeks, for the first time in many, many years, the river got to run. And there was a huge celebration, broad amount of demographics up there. And we did even have a representative from the utilities, Julie Esty from MEA, that was able to bring her kids up to this event. We are working on another event that's just coming together kind of quickly. It literally in the last week has been talked about. A few years ago, we did what's called the Bucket Brigade, where a bunch of folks went up there and we created a line and basically people took a bucket of water and climbed it over the dam and dumped it into an empty dry bed. We're going to be pulling some kind of event like that together here in a month or two as well. In 2020, we had a huge support of AFN, unanimous. Most of you know AFN is tribes, corporations, nonprofits, many affiliations. We had a resolution from AFN supporting the Eklutna people on having permanent water released into that watershed. The Native Village of Eklutna has updated a resolution with the same request, and there is a resolution that has passed the Eklutna Inc. board. I've seen drafts. I think that's coming. That's also supporting that. We're going to work with the utilities if we have enough time. I've been working with Julie on this. AFN is coming up pretty darn quick here in October. Our goal is possibly to have an information booth at AFN that lets the utilities talk about the project, the science, the data they've collected, showing that they're working on the 1991 agreement, and we would staff it with NVE staff and some of ourselves to talk about the end goal of having permanent water down that river. There'll be an announcement probably early next year, after over 1,500 years of settlement by the Klutna people, the Dena'ina, at that village. We are working toward having a gathering center. We are going to be looking at building a beautiful multi-use facility in the village that will have a tourism and educational component to it. Our goal will be to have some trails that go to the river that will have some stands and some signage and some native language that folks will be able to see the fish. There are 5 species of salmon that run that river. I just got educated by Mark Lamro. It is the largest size king. If you think about how an indigenous king, how big they can get, the Klutna River has the largest size king in North Cook Inlet. So if you think of Deshka and you think of the Little Sioux and you think of if you get an Aboriginal fish, how big they can get, that's how big the Klutna king salmon were. It was a massive river. We still have king salmon coming in there. There's been reports from Fish and Game since the lower dam has come out that we have seen sockeye and silvers make it way past up a mile or so past the dam. So water is critical for us. This year, we were hoping to have the same kind of an event, about a 3-week release of water. The utilities did on the 5th of this month, did do an 18-hour release of water. And before we change slides, Aaron, did you have any? Okay. Well,
They did a great job.
okay, I think the next slide, if we can. So this shows the dry riverbed before last year, before the utilities went ahead and opened up the lake. Let's go to the next slide. And there we go. That was a big celebration for us to see for the first time the river running. When I say the first time, there have been maybe 10, 12 occasions, the utilities would know more than me, where for whatever reason, a glacier melt or the lake rose high where they would have to release water. So that has happened in the past. Once in a while, we would get called and be given a heads up, but never on a consistent basis like this. So this was a 3-week run. This also helped wash out some sediment and some silt that had built up behind the dam we took down that for over 70 years had been building up. And so for many reasons, this was important to have. But for a mental health, a psychological shot in the arm for the culture, this was huge to see this river run.
And this is still only a percentage of what could be released.
Yeah. Yes. Next slide. This shows some of the sediment that is still behind the original dam that was built in 1929 by Frank Reed. One of the reasons that the federal government ended up building and going up all the way to the lake was back in the day, this lower dam kept getting built up by sediment, and they just 400 feet down in the canyon, it was almost impossible with the old cranes to try to go down and clear that sediment out. And it just became impossible. And with the growing community, the federal government addressed it by doing the larger dam up. But you can see we were hopeful to have a little bit more water running this year or maybe next year, because we still need to wash some of that sediment out. Next slide. I think this is the most important, and I think this is the most impactful. This is the lake before it was dammed. You can see the mouth into the Klutna River. You can see the size of that river. We walk it quite a bit. There's been a lot of interest, not just from the Alaska Native community, but several universities. We've had some professors, most recently UC Davis professor is up here writing a chapter in a book. And that lake has become quite a recreation area. So I think we all know that we go up there and we hike around that lake and we enjoy it. But what we've got to remember is that that river is critical to habitat for the salmon. One more slide. This just shows some upper additional water feeding into the dry bed of the Klutna River, but there are other streams that run into it. Mark Lamro, who cannot be here today, the environmental folk for gentleman from the native village of Eklutna wanted me to remind that this is a sockeye lake. Sockeye used to run up to it. The ultimate goal in 20 years, this could be a world-class fishery, that the Eklutna people realize and are ready for this, that we would like to have water run down on a permanent basis, but that also means that we're going to have to address the community wanting to be able to fish the river at some point, and we are prepared to know that that's going to be realistic, especially at the lower. So the tribes that'll be a good problem to have. You know, if we don't want combat fishing, but we recognize it would be a good problem to have because it means we've got fish, we've got water down there. I just want to make a comment on our late Congressman Don Young. In 1991, his office was the architect of the 1991 agreement. For those most of you know, turned over Snettisham over to Juneau, and turned over the Eklutna to the Eklutna purchasers, which at the time were the 3 power utilities, which 2 have since merged. Eklutna people have worked very well, have been partners with the utilities. Every time they've needed something from us, we've stepped up. They needed to put new power lines in 2010. Jim Posey at the time, representing the city, came to us, the corporation. We went to the village. We put the land up, and they put new power lines that connected this hydro project and modernized it. When MEA came to us to build a new power plant, we went out to the village. It was a touchy subject. We are users of electricity. We have a great relationship with MEA, and we supported the idea of making land available for their new power plant. When MEA needed to stretch cables from a rock knob all the way across the hay flats to backside of Palmer, the corporation stepped up. The theme here is we have worked very well with the utilities. Every time anybody's needed anything from Eklutna, they've gotten it from the Eklutna people. This is the one thing we're requesting that they believe it's their turn, and that is to get some water down the watershed. There were letters written in August 6th of 2008 from Don Young to the CEOs of the utilities individually and general, and it was a very nice letter. And basically he was saying his intent was to hope to see salmon back in that river and restoration happen. And he was the architect that turned over the utilities, or the generation to the utilities. We're optimistic that there's a balance there. The river's not going to be the same. It's never going to have the same amount of water running down it. We understand it's used for other reasons, that lake, but we also optimistically believe that some water can come down and do some healing on that. And I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Before that, I just want to ask a quick question. When you said you want some water to come down the watershed, I assume you mean permanently.
Correct.
Permanently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Curtis. Yeah, it's been a long road for the native village of Eklutna and trying to see this. And it's something that I think we're on the precipice. And I think Curtis has done a really good job of encapsulating how the Eklutna people have worked hard to be good neighbors. And we're just looking for the same. And we also think, I think if there's one thing that, despite your political leanings, I think the one thing we can all agree on is putting another salmon producing stream in Upper Cook Inlet is something that will be viewed positively. In my lifetime, I've watched the Upper Cook Inlet fishery completely collapse. I don't think there's one salmon producing stream that you can fish in for king salmon currently in Upper Cook Inlet that's not hatchery fish.
I think I agree with you on your political calculus. Mr. Dunbar.
I think you underestimate the good people of Anchorage. Someone will find a way to oppose a new salmon stream.
I know, but salmon unite most Alaskans.
Usually.
There's always a few. I get it. But,
We'll find someone.
but it's probably the least contentious.
Yeah. No, but my question for you is, we've been working on this obviously for years, and it seems, from our perspective, it seems like we're making good progress, but I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on, have we hit any snags? Do you think there's anything that is being, that is not moving at the pace you would like to see it? It's kind of want to.
Well, I think we were deeply disappointed that there wasn't another release event similar, maybe not even for as long, but the quantity. The utilities currently are saying that the sort of the auspice for the original release last year was to collect data, and they feel that they have enough data, and the 1 year of data was enough to understand flows. I don't believe that to be correct. And I think there's a lot of variables that, come into play environmentally. I'm sure that actually right now, if you were to go to the river, it's probably pretty high. But this time last year, it may not have been. So I think we have found that some of our partners are more supportive than others, and some of our partners are using certain things to drag their feet a little bit.
If I can add to that, in 2002, the 1991 agreement left the Eklutna people out as a signatory of the agreement. How that happened was pretty shocking. I mean, why we weren't in there was pretty shocking. And so the Eklutna people weren't formally included in this process when it comes to a signatory, and that's a sore subject. But we worked well to get to this point with the utilities. In 2002, we tried to take a step to solve that, and with the credit of the utilities, they supported that, which was a one-on-one meeting and a relationship that has nothing to do with the big consulting team speaking on behalf of this project, but is directly the CEOs and the board members of the utilities directly meeting with the council themselves. So we had a pretty good meeting in 2 years ago before COVID happened, to kick off the idea that we would meet on an annual basis. COVID happened, that hasn't happened. It is happening on the 19th of September at the Cook Inlet at the Siri building on the 1st October. Thank you, 19th, at the Siri building, which is also the Eklutna floor. Each floor of that Siri building is named after one of the villages of Siri. And we're going to be meeting with them. There's going to be some anxiety expressed, I imagine, from some council members about the water flow, and some good, healthy dialogue. I think where everybody is right now is two things I've been hearing. One, we offered, as the tribe offered, to say there's a lot of federal money and grant money that if the tribe and the utilities work together, we might be able to start bundling some money to start building up a war chest of how to deal with restoration. It may not have to be just on the back of the utilities. There's the tribe wants to help bring in some money. I think the utilities wanted to get to their data first, and that conversation hasn't moved forward. I'm not saying for any reason, but I'm restating it today that there's an option there for the tribe to really be going after some federal dollars. And there's some foundation. I am on the Rasmussen Foundation board. Rasmussen Foundation, before I was on the board, did put $250,000 into the removal of the dam. The board has expressed to me that they want to step up, and when there's a plan for restoration, whatever they need to do, there's other philanthropic organizations. So I think the utilities will have some partners here that can help deal with the cost of what restoration is going to be. And I think what they're going to hear at this coming meeting from the tribe is that offer again, that hand extended to let's not wait. Let's talk about moving forward on that. And I know of several council members that would like to hear the answer. Are you going to support releasing water permanently? Every time that question hasn't been bluntly asked, but it's been inferred, and it keeps going back to, well, we're working on the data. We're working on the data. We get that, but we're talking human beings here, to a culture. And all they want to know is there going to be support on a permanent basis to release water? And if that answer is silent, and I've had good conversations with the folks over here, silence is an answer. It's not the answer you want to hear, but if you stay silent, paranoia, anxiety, things can happen. And that becomes an answer. And then both parties lose control of the dialogue. So silence is something we'd like to, and I'm not saying the utilities have been silent on it, but I know they're going to get asked this question by multiple council members, and they're going to look them in the eye. Are you going to support a permanent release of water? And I think we're 3 years into this. The council would like to know that answer. AFN is coming up. There's a lot of leadership from AFN that's asking us where we stand on this project, where things are going, and that's why we're trying to maybe have an information booth if we can pull it off.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jessica Davidson.
Move to extend until 12:10.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Quinn Davidson, second by Mr. Cross. Any objection? Hearing none, we're extended. Thank you, Mr. Cross. You have the floor.
Thank you. I love this. I probably go up to Eklutna Lake with my kids probably twice a month, so I live near there. absolutely most beautiful little spot of Alaska, most people. So, and I think it's important to realize that that stream is requiring less than 10% of the actual water usage. Most of it goes to the power plant. I'm curious though, I have noticed in the last several years, the lake levels. Can you speak a little bit about, is there any concern about the lake levels? You know, we just had a Harvard study coming out talking about glacier receding. This year during that, where it was really hot, I don't remember it being that low. And what is the preemptive measures and how do we prioritize that regarding the dispute over, hey, letting the water go more permanently? Can you speak to water levels?
I don't know unless Aaron can, we can speak to that because of the data and the math. That would be maybe more of an appropriate, and we do have a representative. I see some folks from MEA. That water is released through a 4-mile tunnel that goes down to the mountain that goes to a hydro project. How the utilities manage when the lake's up and down, other than when Mother Nature manages when the lake's up or down, there's that whole part of that I'm not very familiar with, and I don't know.
I'll jump in there and say that in this room now, probably 2 years ago, we had a briefing from AWWU, and there is a master plan report on their website, and their projection is that, including all conservation questions and questions related to climate that they have been studying, they still project more than 100 years of water available at that site, which we've asked them to put some planning into what happens when, because 100 years in the lifespan of a city is not that long. But practically speaking, it's well beyond our lifetimes that they project ample water supply for their needs based on current use. And so that's where the projection questions, the analysis, and the data kind of continue. But we've been reported to, and it's in a master plan report, that they have what they project more than 100 years of water.
And I don't know if that's an answer, Tony. You know anything about the management of the lake?
Last year was a little odd year. Just for everybody's, we were 13% low on inflows last year due to the fact that it was a dry year. That's one of the biggest factors.
We probably made up for that in the last 4 weeks, though.
Yeah.
Yes, we have. All right, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Oh, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Aaron and Curtis for being here. As Forrest said, this has been sort of a long process, even at the assembly level, but far longer for you all. And it was really exciting when CEA and the others agreed to do the flushing flow last year. So I guess my question is, my understanding is that Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA and Native Village of Eklutna biologists and others that are part of the technical group recommended that the flow be done this year. And maybe this isn't a question for you, it's a question for Julie, or I guess if the experts are recommending that it be done, why aren't we doing it? And doesn't it damage? My understanding is the longer we don't do these flows, the more the sediment builds up. And then fish eventually will not be able to get there if we can't get that sediment flushing out. I mean, it's the whole purpose of the flow. So I guess the question is, why do you think it's not happening when a majority of the folks involved want it to happen?
That's a great question. We were disappointed it didn't. The teams you mentioned believed it should have happened. There were value to it happening. The consultants felt that they had enough data from year one that they didn't need to do it. And we were saying, well, what about doing it anyway beyond the data? Why not do it for the spirit of our culture? Do it for letting the water down. We did have a meeting with both Julie Esty and Julie here. Aaron and I did. It was a positive meeting. Both Julies have a role where they are communicating on behalf of their organization. They're not decision makers of their organization. So they had to keep repeating that, they were following what their consultants were saying. A byproduct of that was that there was a release for 18 hours this year. Technically, the engineer said and had to justify it by saying, we're going to check the gate up there. So by opening the gate, we'll release it. I think it was a byproduct of both Julie's hearing us and some taking that message back and saying, let's show some effort here. I'm hopeful that was the reason why. It's not enough, but why they're not, we can't answer that question.
Yeah, the only thing we know is that the only thing communicated is that they've said that their outside consultants and advisors felt that it was not necessary, that they had the data.
Right, okay.
May I follow up
Yeah,
quickly?
please. And we're running out of time here.
So I guess I'll just say that, I mean, I don't want to put Julie on the spot, but certainly, Julie, if you want to respond to that, I want to give you the opportunity. But it sounds like even if some consultants think it's not necessary, but a majority feel it's appropriate, I guess I'd like Chugash and others to tell us why, whether it's at this meeting or otherwise, they're not choosing to do it. And I know it's not your decision necessarily individually, but I think that would be helpful for all of us.
Well, I can add a little bit.
Can you speak on the mic?
Julie?
Yeah,
You can grab that one.
thanks.
It off. Julie Haskett from Chugach Electric, and Tony Zellers can help me. So I don't believe that it's a majority. I think we have consultants that the utilities have hired, and when they're referred to as outside consultants, they're largely from Alaska. The team that's in the field is made up largely of Alaskans. So there's our consultants and their very wide group of experts that meet on a regular basis. We have technical working groups, of which Native Village of Eklutna and others are a part of. I think there were some of our stakeholders that thought we needed more data, but the folks who were in the field doing the work said there was enough data from the flows last year that it was not necessary to repeat that level again this year. I know there was disagreement on that, but I don't believe that it was the majority of folks had a contrary opinion. I think there was definitely differing opinions, but the consultants that work with all three utility owners on a regular basis felt they had the data that they needed. And we did agree that at the end of this summer, if that's an incorrect conclusion, that they would go back and do more. But we are still, in the field gathering information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I just quickly, and
Yeah,
then
very
I'll,
quickly.
so I guess whether it's true a majority or, some believe some believe the other thing. If the tribe is saying this is what we want and it helps with fish passage and it doesn't harm anything, why can't we say, okay, we respect what you want and your river doesn't take a lot for us to do it. We did it last year. Why not?
So I that is a very fabulous question. And I think it gets to some cultural issues and it gets to a number of very valid and important questions. And so I'm going to ask you not to respond to that because we're out of time. And I'm going to ask that to be the beginning question of the next part of this conversation.
Great.
And so what we will do is figure out a time, we'll continue with the quarterly reporting, but I think that there is obvious interest. And I'm sorry we shorted you 10 minutes in this conversation, everybody, but we're going to have to come back. Would you make sure that question gets recorded and sent to me to get it on the agenda?
Sure. And
Or Desiree, maybe, could you get that
are
question?
you feeling okay with that, Julie? Did you want to answer? Or are you
We're out of
fine?
time,
Because
so I
yeah,
have
I
to
know, but we
open
could
us up to
extend.
He told me I wasn't allowed to say
I
anymore.
mean,
So
you can't speak.
I
You're
just
not
don't want her
allowed,
to feel
but
like she's not able to.
we're just out of time and I have to open for audience participation
Oh,
before we
okay.
adjourn.
But at the next quarterly update, let's
Yeah,
talk about this
awesome.
again. I wish we could have done it when we had Samantha and Mike Brody here,
Right.
because we're always available to answer those questions. But at the next quarterly update, we can have that discussion again. And by then, our field work will be done for the summer.
Okay. And thanks for being here.
You
Yeah,
bet.
Thanks. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to tell you couldn't answer. I'm just trying to manage time. So the last part of our agenda is requirement for opening the floor for audience participation. Does any member of the public wish to be heard? You would have 3 minutes. Anyone wish to speak on this topic? Now would be your chance, or any topic related to enterprise and utilities work. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody rise to speak, and so we'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to getting to the heart of the questions. We're adjourned.